Strap up people, we're picking fights today. Jokes aside, this is a response video to a YouTuber named Xel Writer, a guy who covers a lot of RWBY content. One of them is his 6-minute video called RWBY Is, using its characters, The Purpose of Robyn Hill. If only the guy used a period in that title. But moving on, this was an interesting video I found a while back. And I didn't agree a lot with it, but it's interesting to talk about. And most importantly, it's a good way to air out my grievances with Robyn and Ironwood's characters. That said, before getting started, let me set the record straight right friggin' now. There are no hard feelings towards Xel or his audience. The least I can ask of them and of him is to get where I'm coming from and be civil about it. Y'all like the show, I kick its teeth in, love and peace and all that. With that, the original video's in the description in case I miss anything. On with the show.
Now then, let's discuss Robyn Hill and her narrative role, and more to the point why it was so necessary that she serve as Ironwood's foil.
Alright, we got our premise, and honestly, I don't even have an issue with it. It's obvious that the writers intended Robyn and Ironwood to parallel each other, both in terms of ideals and other aspects. The difference? I think...
It's all bullshit, folks. It's all bullshit, and it's bad for you.
First and foremost, Ironwood and Robyn are contrasted constantly, not in person, but by their pervasive presence across the city of Mantle. We are reintroduced to Ironwood blaring out propaganda about how dangerous the world outside is, but how he will keep them safe, followed by Winter reinforcing his message all across Mantle. Meanwhile, Robyn's presence is quiet, less obtrusive, not demanding the people's attention, nor reliant on mechanisms that are dependent on exclusive access.
Okay, not a bad summary. This whole scene does serve as set dressing for the volume. But one thing I gotta mention, what the hell do you mean by exclusive access? All the citizens can view the messages on the buildings and through the streets. If anything, they want less access to all these messages and propaganda, because they're tired of friggin' hearing about it.
They're directly contrasted by a supporter also locked up in the Mantle with the main cast. However, his personality is such that it helps obscure the truth of the situation for the protagonists, because his personality comes off as somewhat difficult to take seriously.
Which, in my opinion, was a bad move. On top of the scene being completely unfunny and awkward, not to mention poor exposition, it just doesn't help set the weight of the contrast between both characters. Riddle me this, people. Why, oh why, in a plot point about the dichotomy between Ironwood and Robyn's morals and beliefs, would you have the first civilian viewpoint on either side be a mini Alex Jones? This trick could only work if it builds a portfolio about Robyn in our heroes' minds, something that would be later subverted when they actually meet her in person. But how can that thought be subverted if they never took it seriously in the first place? The world may never know. But what we do know is that in the scene before this one, when the team met some drunk Ironwood supporters that Xel didn't mention for some reason, but whatever, the scene had very similar problems. However, I'll give it this, at least that scene was taken a bit more seriously, and it does a slightly better job at setting the perspective on how people view Ironwood in this current paradigm, which is further explained by Pietro later in that episode.
After all, it was Ironwood's elite forces, rarely seen in Mantle, who arrested our protagonist for unlawful weapon usage defending the civilians, despite Crow being a huntsman. Okay,
two things. Firstly, I don't know if Xel's statement about the Aesops was negative or not, but hey, I like being thorough, so just in case, of course the Aesops are rarely seen in Mantle. They're the top huntsmen in the country. They probably got way more meaningful missions to do. Or would you rather have the Navy SEALs stop a bank robbery? Second, in regards to the Crow thing, putting the stolen plane aside, yes, Crow is licensed, but he also suddenly came to the country with a few armed novices. The Aesops don't even know who Crow is at the time, and they definitely don't know the rest of the heroes. They may not have done anything wrong, but these are still, in their mind, armed, unregistered vigilantes who infiltrated the country illegally. Being questioned should be the bare minimum.
The idea that they were doing this over the stolen Manta doesn't fly because they ignored Maria, meaning the evidence was not even circumstantial.
About that.
It is so good to see all of you.
Our reception didn't really convey that.
I sincerely regret how you were treated by my team. When a rogue airship entered our airspace, it raised some red flags. We assumed the ship was stolen.
Also, Maria was not in the scene with them when they were fighting the Grimm, and they wouldn't have known she was directly involved. Why would they assume that this random old lady would be involved with a group of vigilantes? That's the definition of circumstantial, buddy.
Now, Ironwood did present himself in a rather affable and open fashion following this, however that doesn't end up being wholly truthful. Why? Because when we first meet Robyn Hill, she and her happy huntresses have erected a barricade between the road and Amity Coliseum. It is here that Robyn reveals Ironwood's lie of omission. Those supplies RWBY, Penny and Crow were innocently escorting, purchased, marked and planned for Mantle.
So she knew about this information, and instead of going public, threatening to go public, barter with the other council members, or God forbid, using that handy dandy invisible girl you got there to sneak into the compound and get more info, she decides to confront Clover directly and potentially get arrested, thus putting herself, her comrades, and her whole fucking campaign in needless danger. Yeah, she's got my vote.
It's only the dual effect of Robyn's seeming respect for Penny and the threat she poses that caused her to back off, going full Robin Hood and reclaiming what was taken from the people then and there.
Her stupidity aside, Xel regrets to mention another parallel in this scene. Robyn didn't appear wholly trustworthy either. She was planning to ambush RWBY and the others and take the truck, assuming that she knocks Crow, RWBY, and Clover out and just put them in the car with them instead of leaving them out in the frozen tundra. They would still be in severe harm's way because of Robyn's actions. She was pulling some cloak and dagger shit right there. It's understandable why she did it, but still, it's interesting to know. Also, another contrast Xel regrets to mention here is that Robyn and Ironwood are pretty similar in their disregards for higher authority. After all, Ironwood was already established with not having a soft spot for Atlas nobles, Jacques most of all, evidenced by Volume 4 and how he defended Weiss and took Winter under his wing. And in Volume 7, he actively went behind the Council's back to do the Amity Project, presumably because all the bureaucracy would get in the way of something he believes is the right thing to do. It's the same with Robyn. Now, on the moral spectrum, of course, who is right and who is wrong in these circumstances is very much different. But still, that's not a contrast I feel like should have been explored.
This serves to establish Robyn as someone very straightforward and honest, but who will not be swayed by appeals to authority in favor of what's right.
This also means that she isn't very smart either. Honestly, as straightforward as she is, I have no idea how she managed to qualify as a politician before this election shit went on. Case in point, Robyn, Penny just saved your goddamn life. Like, okay, she wasn't there and you steal the truck.
And then what?
Well, I'll tell you, you get arrested for stealing materials necessary for the military, have propaganda made of you branding you a criminal, and say bye-bye to that election and all the people you could potentially help in Mantle in the long run.
Following this exchange, we next see contrast brought up thanks to the election itself. Ironwood makes it clear that despite his distaste for Jacques, he clearly doesn't like the prospect of Robyn on the council either, seeming vexed at the prospect of having to coordinate with her or anyone. Meanwhile, despite her own subordinates clearly not being fond of the Aesop's presence, Robyn establishes herself as someone who will reach across the aisle and who genuinely does want to work together, or at the very least respects the necessity of it.
The dumb blockade plan aside, the contrast Xel outlines here works. However, I wonder why it doesn't seem like Robyn even attempted to work with the other council members to find out what James was doing. And honestly, it would probably work given how much they were against his actions later in the volume. Not to say that it's a complete guarantee, but it doesn't even seem like she tried. And if she was planning on just standing up to him when she finished her election, why the fuck would you potentially make Ironwood an obstacle towards your goal? What is the reason for that?
Also, idle aside, but the simple fact that Ironwood neglects Mantle, a city he is both obliged to protect and also that Atlas relies on to even function, should be a pretty big tell that this is not the guy you want leading the world in a charge against Salem, because he will screw everyone else over to protect Atlas. Or whatever big brain plan he has in the works.
That depends on the circumstances, buddy. After all, his plan was to use Atlas's vast amounts of resources to help all the kingdoms after telling them about Salem and bringing back global communications. Volume 8's cartoonish nonsense aside, most of his plans did neglect Mantle, but the way he saw it, it'd be a short-term loss compared to what he can accomplish for the world. I won't say all of his plans were perfect, Hell, I'd say even the hole in the Mantle wall and the lacking cybersecurity were pretty out of character given his paranoia, and of course I don't agree with most of his actions morally. That said, I do believe that what Xel is doing here is oversimplifying Ironwood's actions and motives. He does neglect Mantle, but from a character perspective, it's understandable, for the most part, why he did so. Ironwood has always been motivated primarily to save Remnant, not just Atlas. His prior actions in previous volumes and even his plan in Volume 7 corroborate this. Plus, Xel is disregarding the simple fact that you can't always save everyone. There might be circumstances where leaving everyone else behind to fight another day is a more reasonable option. It simply depends on the circumstance. And also, technically, Team RWBY have done so in Volume 8 anyways, but let's not talk about it. Whether or not what he did was the good or best option is debatable. But making the pragmatic choice is not a sign of bad leadership, as he's hinting here in that last line. If anything, it's the opposite.
And the moment you start seeing people as expendable, yeah, that's when you become a problem, especially in a hope punk series like RWBY.
Alright, let's break this shit down. And I'm mostly gonna be talking about Volume 7 Ironwood here. I don't endorse Ironwood's actions in Volume 8. And pretty much all that shit is out of character and I hate it and it's stinky and stupid anyway. The themes of the story are important for narrative consistency. It's obvious that Team RWBY / Robyn are meant to be morally and pragmatically right at the tail end of this whole arc here. The issue? It's the lack of respect towards Ironwood's circumstances. The story wants to hold morally gray themes and explore the idea that saving the world from Salem isn't going to be an easy thing, especially if you try to maintain your morals. And it's fine if the team are shown to be correct in their assumptions that, hey, we shouldn't neglect anyone. The problem is that the way they went about it was absolutely fucking bonkers. Not only having the main characters and even Robyn being flat out hypocrites for reasons that are barely explored in the narrative, but also when Ironwood is driven to absolute lunacy as time went on, to the extent it just removes all charitability and seriousness from this plot point. The basis of his entire thing, in Volume 7 especially, is that he is fighting Satan. He's fighting the closest thing to Satan in the series, and no one else is doing anything about it. Of course, some losses would need to be cut, at least in his mind. The problem is that Xel doesn't highlight this. Especially given the fact that the critical thing to remember is that James does not see this as an easy choice. There are several scenes where he is racking himself with guilt over what he is doing. In fact, this is the biggest problem in the video in my opinion, and even in the show kind of. The lack of delving into the reasons why both characters act the way that they do, especially Ironwood. It creates a very skewed view of the situation without delving deeper into the characters, which in my opinion is a great disservice. It would be like if I made the upteenth video praising the dynamic and rivalry between Naruto and Sasuke without discussing their motives behind what they do or the aspects of their characters that are similar to each other, that give their dynamic way more depth. That would just make the video less interesting. So let me help you out here. Both Robyn Hill and James Ironwood, pre-Volume 8, are both people who want to use their influence and power for good, but they differ because of what they know and what they stand to lose. Robyn fervently cares for Mantle, acting for its benefit at every step, but that is because she is in a smaller position of power than Ironwood, and didn't witness the true threat beyond their walls. Her acts of rebellion are well-meaning, and she holds her home in high value, even giving up being in the military to change it for the better. Yet compared to what Ironwood is up against, and what the world is up against, it's all in the short term, and she doesn't know it. She doesn't know the threat of Salem until later, and unlike James, she didn't witness the horrors of the fall of Beacon herself, but Ironwood did. And to him, it was all his fault. So, much like Robyn, he took a stand to never fail Remnant ever again, especially in the long term. no matter the cost. However, that doesn't make Robyn's perspective any less valid. Her position allowed her to be in tune with what the people need and want in order to have better lives for themselves. They both want to do what's right, but the big question is, do the ends justify the means? That's the center of the conflict that the show wants to tell. It wasn't told very well, but you get my point here. It would have added some pizzazz to the video. Just a thought.
But where the prospect of a more powerful, implacable foe has so far done little more than slow Robyn down...
Well, yeah, that makes sense, because all Robyn has to worry about is saving a city from a threat she doesn't understand. In contrast, Ironwood had been thrown into the abyss because of Cinder and Salem, and now it's happening on his own turf, on top of the knowledge that the bitch is immortal.
Ironwood, when faced with even a reminder of Cinder, breaks and will burn the entire house of cards down to keep himself warm another day.
It wasn't just the reminder of Cinder that set him off. It was the fact that she practically shat on his lawn. For all he knew, Cinder could have dropped a freaking bomb in his office or anywhere else in his facility, or something like that could potentially put himself and the world in danger.
Cinder's presence alone causing him to order the death of Freya and cancelling the evacuation of Mantle because he blames the refugees for Cinder getting into the city.
He doesn't blame the refugees or anything for what happened. He just acknowledges that getting the refugees out of Mantle in the Atlas provided an opening the enemy could exploit. Which is true, and because of that, the Winter Maiden was in grave danger.
Also, I would note again that helping someone resist a literally unlawful arrest and also not wanting to be taken to the flying fortress of the man who just condemned your entire city to die isn't terrorism.
Okay, first off, I don't know if anyone called this moment an act of terrorism, and I'm not getting into that debate again because fuck me, that's so meaningless. What I heard a lot more of is that this scene was fucking stupid. And this brings me to an even bigger point. Robyn decides to fight on a plane and potentially die, which is somehow better than trying to negotiate with James. You know, something that worked last time. And hell, even if that would fall through, try to escape with Crow afterwards anyways. She shows no consideration for Crow, who is stuck in this position along with her. Pays no mind to the freaking serial killer they worked so hard to capture, or the pilot just doing his job. In fact, why didn't she simply just hold the pilot hostage and tell him to get the plane down and allow her to escape? That would be a much better plan and would potentially probably work. And this is the problem with Robyn's character. She's a fucking idiot with the self-preservation of a donkey on wheels. Her motivations are somewhat sympathetic, but her characterization is piss poor and her actions are so idiotic. Even though she is supposed to be a leader who we should root for, she never thinks more than a single step ahead. And yet we're supposed to take her seriously.
Meanwhile, Ironwood relies more and more on force and authority. Having already rankled at questions or counterpoints, he grows even more violent in the face of disobedience and even outright tortures Watts into subservience, or seeming subservience given Watts plays him.
Which is really, really dumb. He shoots a guy who wasn't a threat, but doesn't shoot Watts? Do you begin to understand why I don't even consider this guy the same Ironwood? In fact, fuck calling this guy that name. He is not worthy of it, okay? Let's come up with something stupid to call him. Jake Steelbark. Yeah, that works. So Jake Steelbark is the Saturday morning cartoon villain wearing Ironwood's skin suit, and he isn't even a competent one. Hey Jakey, how about you track the heroes' phones or use Crow as a bargaining chip to trade for Penny? You would have had them by the balls, you bearded fuckhead. If Ironwood was in character, even at this stage in the series, that's definitely what he would have done. But I guess Xel wouldn't agree with me here, so we may as well just wrap things up.
Ironwood's despair and fear consumed him entirely, letting him drive himself beyond rationality as his desperate desire for safety and control leaves Mantle to die and Atlas spiraling ever downwards, right into Salem's hands.
Yes, because it was Ironwood's idea to send all of his citizens to a godforsaken desert in the most dangerous place on the planet. It was Ironwood's fault that Atlas fell, leaving all said citizens' belongings and best technology known to man in absolute zero. And it was Ironwood who foolishly forgot that Cinder was around and allowed her the chance to kill Penny and steal the relics. Oh, classic James.
Are you sure about that?
Look, I don't have an issue with Xel's overall goal with this video, which is to point out how purposefully the writers juxtapose Ironwood and Robyn. He thinks the show did the idea justice. I think the opposite. I think I made that clear. So let's put that shit aside, because there's two things that I believe that hold this video back. Number one, he doesn't mention the reasons behind both characters' actions, simply pointing out the actions themselves and the results of them, thus creating a skewed and honestly uninteresting view of how Ironwood and Robyn parallel each other. Again, see the Naruto Sasuke example I said earlier. And number two, bad references and evidence. Whether or not we agree that this plot point was done well, or that either Robyn or Ironwood are well-written characters, Xel was definitely inaccurate with many of his evidence during the video. Much of it could have been touched up on, retooled, and delivered much more neutrally in order to better serve his overall point. But again, I like to hear what you guys think about it. That's just my thoughts. But yeah, those are my thoughts on Xel's video. I give it a 5 out of 10, I guess. I don't know. I'm not sure what rating system I have for these things. Oh, if anyone in his audience disagrees, feel free to comment. And to Xel himself, I can link him to a private server where we can chat. See you around.